But yeah, so this evening, I wanted to talk about this topic with these guys, just because it's something that we're all sort of interested in, and there's been a sort of ongoing like hum of a conversation in the background surrounding this topic in Star Citizen over the last year. It's just been continuing to sort of simmer, and it's the weapon balancing, not only in terms of guns on your ships, but also missiles and torpedoes. And so I wanted to bring these guys on and pick their brains a little bit, hear their thoughts about where they think the balance is going based off what's been said, what their thoughts are on that information, and what else they'd like to see. Before we get into the questions that I have for these guys, I wanted to just drop a few links in chat in reference to what we're talking about. Yogi Klatt, and I always brain fart about what his actual title is. But Yogi's the guy who is basically in charge of anything in terms of the weapon balance and the sort of the vehicle combat experience. So I'm going to drop a couple links in chat real quick. The first one is a... here we go. The first one is from a conversation on Spectrum right about, it was April last year, talking about changes to missiles and torpedoes. So there's that one. As there was a bunch of changes to missiles and torpedoes last year in terms of damage, how fast the missiles and torpedoes fly, and as well as their maneuverability, their flight characteristics. They did a big old balance pass on that, if you remember that, during the 317 branch. And then here's the other quote. This one is a reply from Yogi to another Spectrum post in March of this year in regards to weapon balance for guns. And then there's a video that I found that got me thinking about the topic. I'm going to post the link to the video. It's on YouTube. It's by Hybrid V Audio or Hybrid 5 Audio. And this one is sort of a speculation video on the different ammo types that are in development right now over at CIG for Star Citizen. They talked about the flak ammo in the monthly report for last year as the first new ammo type that's being in development, but they're also getting started with several others, and when we get into that, I'll list them off for you. But you can see them on the progress tracker. They're in development right now. It's going to be interesting to see what they have going on. So, that being said, Night Cobb, how do you feel about the way ship weapons feel right now in terms of feel and function?
Okay, feel and function. I like some aspects of it right now. But like a lot of the community has gotten, the hot take, so to speak, is, there's a growing frustration, and I've got it too. It's more along the lines of what kind of balance can we achieve now to make decisions in the interim feel more interesting rather than straight up aesthetics across a different weapon type. So just to clarify, the example I'll give is I like that there are differences right now between ballistic repeaters and Gatlings and cannons. What I don't like is there's not a single iota of difference between, a Tiger Strike ballistic Gatling and of the same size and the Mantis Gatling. There's not an iota of difference between an attrition size 4 laser repeater and the Rhino size 4 from Klaus and Berner.
Brand diversification.
I'm wondering.
Or brand
Yeah,
model.
exactly. So exactly. I think that kind of balance can be achieved in some aspects of the game. Now, I have suspicions. I actually kind of wrote down 4 weapon stats. I've got Urkel up right now too for reference, but I wrote down 4 weapon stats, and I know you've put the links in there that Yogi mentioned on kind of like a casual, hey, we're still tuning these other facets of the weapons that are not ready to go into the PU yet, but we're tuning them for Squadron 42. So putting these to the side, and I'll just to give you the read ahead. I know we'll talk more about them. Like power, fuel consumption, heat generation, turret/gimbal speed. And this is already a stat, but it has just not been, and this is kind of one of those things, but I'll include it, signature increase. I don't think it really means anything right now. There is a stat that's already like programmed into the game files, but I don't know. It feels pretty uniform across most weapons right now. So I know the other 3, especially like turret/gimbal speed. You know, they showed that video right before they came out with salvaging. And they just had this little snippet during an ISC like, oh, look, with this, we can actually change the rate at which the turret moves based on the size of the weapon attached to it and stuff like that, or the rate at the gimbal moves based on the size of the weapons or components attached. I know that's going to be eventually a thing, and that's going to go into gunnery gameplay for sure. But anyway, I feel like there's an intermediate step that can be taken to provide some more interest in buying weapons, selecting weapons for your ship. You know. And sorry, my last stat was dependability or reliability. However you want to. Almost said skin that cat. That's speciesism right there. Sorry. Peel that potato. Peel that potato. However you want to peel that potato, like basically how often you would have to repair the weapon, and obviously that's waiting on or do maintenance on it, which would be further down the road.
Oh, okay. So like the weapon, what would you call it? The durability versus
durability is another good way.
Yeah, like versus misfire, or jam, type reliability.
Yeah. I think you could probably group that all into like one category for it, but I don't know. Maybe it is so intricate that you got to split it out.
Cool.
Well, they do have HP on Urkel.
They have HP. Yeah. That would be the other. So I'll be honest with you. I'm going to tell you right now. I know there's going to be a temptation to talk about like hardening. I would save that for a component discussion. I don't know how much weapon hardening we need. You know what I mean?
Oh, in terms of like hardening from the distortion.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Before I ask Atira, real quick chat. If you just want to let me know if the audio between us sounds relatively balanced. If I've just been trying to tweak it to make sure the little bars are about equal between all 3 of us. So if it sounds if it needs a little tweaking, just let me know in chat. I'd appreciate it. So Atira, same question. How do you feel about the way ship weapons feel and function right now for you, especially considering your preferred combat ships and weapons that you use most often?
Well, the note I wrote was repeaters are dope. Energy repeaters are right. I mean, so I've been flying a lot of the Scorpius, and it's a fantastic ship. You put 3 size 3 Panthers on there, and you just go all day and have a great time with it, right? I don't have any super nuanced analysis. I'll just say that I think that there is a need for them to find some type of balance between, and I know that they're working on it, right? So the interim, they're going to make here in the somewhat near future. They've talked about this. They're going to make ballistics just go right through your shields, right?
Oh, they did.
Is that in?
That's
I
in.
remember. Okay, well, so then I'll tell you in the gameplay that I've seen, I've not seen a lot of.
Oh, you hadn't heard.
Sorry.
So what they did, originally, prior to this last patch, most armor values, and armor is, not where they want it, right? They want the ability to deplete armor essentially with weapon fire,
right.
So that you might start with a certain armor percentage on a fresh, fully repaired ship, but that would, as you take as you take rounds, obviously the armor capabilities are
over time.
reduced. Yeah, it degrades.
Sure.
Thank you. So, but they had static values that were just a percentage, basically a percentage of damage reduction. And they're really low. They were like 10%, depending on whether it was energy or physical damage. And so they did that shield pen for ballistics in the 318 PTU, and they put it out to everybody, and they just left it that way for a hot second, and it was ridiculous. You would see an arrow melt a reclaimer in 30 seconds. So
Okay.
yeah, so they were like, okay, got to fix it. And it was a weird thing that they did. They decided the way they would fix it, they were like, we're going to bump all those armor values up. But they just really bumped them all up to right around the same range, minus maybe 4 or 5%. So now they're all 50%. The net effect.
I was not aware of this, and I've not heard anybody talk about it either. So
well, the reason is because the net effect made essentially the change that they made completely and utterly negligible for us in the PU.
Wow. So they didn't differentiate.
So now it doesn't feel any different.
They didn't differentiate armor. How do I say this? So a size 4 weapon, ballistic weapon, has more mass, right, and potentially muzzle velocity striking into, let's say, an arrow. But that 50% armor takes that size 4 just as well as the armor on a javelin right now. Okay.
You're exactly right.
Okay.
You're exactly right.
I had not heard that. Well, that's why I never saw a change, because everybody just didn't use ballistics. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, I mean, they got to find something. I think probably 50% is too high in that case. And they definitely need to tier it by weapon caliber, right? Because there are some, they'll just have to work on that. So I think one of the things they could do to make ballistic weapons a little bit more prominent is to increase the ammunition carried.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Well, I'm not saying forever. I'm not saying about forever, but right, if you're basically, for every bullet shot, you have to get 2 bullets on target for full damage effect. And you already, I mean, I've run ballistics before, and you run out after either one protracted fight or 2 or 3 like short, quick fights. And there's no way to replace it right now outside of flying all the way back to a station and using a station. So
it
I don't
makes
know.
me
I think you could probably
how quickly they could implement a fix for that. With they have little component bays all over the place. They can quickly add little doors and hatches to things.
We used to have that. Yeah. We used to have that. when I can't remember what patch it was, but you would have to equip your gun, and then that would give you 2 or 3 additional little hard points. And if you didn't put anything in that hard point, you didn't have any damn ammo. So you had to then go in and you had to attach the right ammo type to each of those. Mm-hmm. And it only lasted like a patch. But yeah, you would have to have some type of means via component bay, and then you would also have to have physicalized ammo boxes that fit, so that you could fall. But that's going to take longer, I think, than flying back to a station.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think for now, I would just double the ammo count, and that puts things roughly back where it was before, or maybe add a quarter of the ammo, just so that guys can hang in a fight for longer than
I feel like
a few seconds.
And I haven't tracked the ammo counts in detail, but I feel like from where they were, it's an order of magnitude less than it was. And I feel like you could double it.
Oh, yeah.
You could double it. It could still be a fraction of what it was, but it would give you a little bit more time. I don't know if it'd be a
fraction. I think it'd be...
If you're going from 1/10 to 1/5,
it'd be a lot closer.
It's a pretty big difference. And I think that would give, especially, it would give people a little bit more staying power in the interim until they can get some sort of reloading mechanic. I apologize. The AC just kicked on, if you guys can hear that behind me. But, yeah, Drew, sorry, if your name looks like something that wasn't just Smash Keyboard, I could say it right. But Drew, Drury.
That's
Drury.
Churro. Oh,
Churro. Yeah, I'm
you
in
know him.
Texas.
You've played with him. It's Churro.
Yeah, I know.
I enjoyed
know
that.
Who he is.
This
But
looks
it's-
like smashed keyboard.
It was Smash Keyboard, but you bring up a good point. The
Yeah.
amount of trigger pull time that you have is very short for a lot of these guns, and I feel like you could lengthen it out a little bit in the meantime while still giving you still have to be cognizant of your ammo count. It isn't, oh, I've got 6 whole minutes of trigger time. It's like, no, you've got a minute and 20 seconds or whatever, not 30 seconds, and so you still have to be cognizant. You can't just hold down the trigger. You have more bursts, but in the interim, because
That's basically 16 trigger pulls, though. If you expend in 16 and you're against a good pilot, you're probably going to pull the trigger more than 16 times trying to get a really good pilot. And
So I'll make a
I'm
compromise with you guys. I'll make a compromise with you guys on this because I've been thinking about this, and I know the big thing right now is here's what CIG wants. They want ballistics for the shields are down, they're the kill shots. Right? You're in the slot, you're behind, the crack pilot, he made a mistake, and you're ready to wipe his hull, and you're ready to do it quickly. Like ballistics are short, fire situations, and they're like the kill shots that they want for the big booms. I think there's a balance to this equation, and I don't know why they're not using it. It's kind of a weird thing because we've had it in game before. And I always don't like bringing up things like, well, we're just waiting on the next tech, in terms of how do we balance the equation now. But I remember when I first started playing in 3.13 or 3.12, if I fired a ballistic Gatling and I just depressed the trigger, I could watch the heat on that weapon gradually go up and up and up and up until eventually I can't use that weapon anymore. Like it would
for a
stop.
hot minute, yeah.
Yeah, and then there's a cooldown phase.
But now you'll expend all your ammo before you hit that
Exact
point.
Exactly, but that's the thing. It's like, okay, well, if the balance was they wanted short bursts, kill shots with good damage pen, shield pen, or whatever. Maybe it's armor penetration. However they want to balance the game. Like, I feel like ballistics, then, you could give them more ammo. Let's make the heat generated by the weapon that much more significant. Then not only that, but we also buy into right now, coolers do all of jack shit for you. There is no reason to change. I don't want to get too much into component discussion, but there's no reason to change out most stock coolers. Well, you could put whatever weapons you want on your ship.
And so I think, but without getting into components, I think that brings up a good point, though. I think what CIG has done is we don't want to mess with coolers and put effort into trying to mess with that until we're ready to do that with resource management. And so it seems with the changes that they're making, like they're just doing it with just the weapon and not anything else inherent in it in order to, okay, this is a baseline for the weapon without being influenced by, if it's an energy weapon, power, your power plants, and how much power you've got directed to it. If it's and I don't think coolers are going to affect a ballistic weapon. I don't think I don't see them running a Maxim style around the barrel coolant mechanism or anything like that. I think it's I think it's going to be an intrinsic to the weapon type value. But yeah, I think that's part of
Well, then the compromise is low ammo, I think.
Yeah. And
so
I think
so it goes back to what you want. Like, do you want ballistics to be low heat generation, high damage at the baseline?
Yeah, but
is that their trade? Yeah, is that their trade-off?
I think that's what they want it to be. But if I squeeze off the rounds in a size 4 Revenant and I hit an arrow, it should just die. 4 or 5 rounds. It should just soft kill it. If we're saying it's that high DPS and it shreds shields and it's all that. Otherwise, I need more ammo than what they give me.
Well, to leverage your military experience, I was kind of curious about this. I wanted to ask you guys this. I don't deal with cannons, and when we get to the missiles and torpedoes discussion, I'll have more to bring to the table on that. But but Gatlings, you know.
So I don't have any experience with Gatlings, but let's talk about
I do.
You do? Hit it.
Okay,
hit
well,
it.
so there you go. All right, so
All right, go.
It's
and
tree
you can leverage in on
0311,
this.
but it's also tree 0331 because I was also a machine gunner. That's my other primary MOS. So
I've done
when it comes to
machine gun.
things,
Oh yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
a Gatling. So
No,
what's your
but
Gatling
it's-
comment?
But as far as with Gatlings, and it's the same sort of principle, except for you have more barrels. That's how you get higher rate of fire. Is okay. This is about as high as you can get with a machine gun. We're just going to add more machine guns essentially in a circle, to the to an extent. That's what they're trying to overcome with Gatlings. But you still with a ballistic Gatling, versus an energy Gatling, you still have a heat issue with a barrel versus I think I think you can kind of get away from it's part of you can get away from it from a sci-fi perspective, really, in that we've got 900 years of material advancements, and I don't think the barrel overheating is going to be an issue before ammo capacity. Because unless
That's probably right.
that this is just me speculating, but I think that if I was going to headcanon it, I could say that unless you have a ship, and you've got a mile-long chain of linked ammo, your issue is that you can ammo still take up space. And your Gatling gun is out here, and so unless you have ammo snaked all the way throughout, inside the ship, you're going to have an issue with space, and so your barrels aren't going to overheat before you have to change out whatever container your ammo is. But if you have a
Which is
energy
what I was
Gatling,
gonna talk to. For
the energy
tanks.
Gatling, the mechanism that generates the energy ammo, the pulse, the projectile, whatever it is, your laser, your emitters, or whatever sci-fi technology they use, I could see those overheating, and you run risk of doing damage to those before your energy supply from your capacitor runs dry, depending on your capacitors. That would be my sort of headcanon for it. But I get where you're going with it, and I think that if I was to pick, I would rather have heat be something from energy weapons, things that using energy to produce a projectile, versus heat being the limiting factor on a projectile weapon. When we have 900 years of materials advantage, and on a gosh, I mean, I could put a lot of rounds through a machine gun before I have to swap out that barrel. And with a Gatling, it's potentially, it's a lot of ammo. It's a long trigger pull, and so I think that if you just make it that you're having to swap out ammo containers more often, it's if you had 2,000 rounds of ammo, then that you would never, you would have to burn through that so fast, you wouldn't even reach a barrel heat issue. It would be kind of nice if they could fake the reloading thing, if they could build in a fake reloading mechanism to say, okay, kind of like how energy weapons have a capacitor bank, and you can run it dry, and then it has to fill back up. If they could fake that to say, okay, here is, you've got an automatic loader system, and you've got a total of 1,000 rounds or 2,000 rounds, but for each magazine it's 250, 400, something like that. I think that would be a good way to
so let me jump in and say,
slow you down,
because all right, a tank has 14,000 rounds of coaxial machine gun ammo on board. So that's broken out into boxes, and the loader, and there is a ammo case. Now, you don't put all of that in the feed tray or in the ammo case at once, but you could put near 1,000 rounds in there 14 times. So for the larger ships, like let's say the Vanguard, or especially if you talk about something like the Warden, a lot of empty space in the Warden, right? They could have a box at your feet that once you break off and you're in quantum, you could simply go back, pick up a box, start feeding into your mechanism again, right? So that every dogfight you come out, you have maybe 1,200 rounds of whatever. So there's today some of our systems, some of our mounted systems, because all of this is mounted systems, right? We carry on board a lot of ammunition. For the 50 cal, we carry 900 rounds standard. So, that's today. And that's 100 rounds a box. And yes, you do have to reload that manually. But I'm just saying, there's, by today's standards, giving a ship with an internal storage area, an internal walk around area, like 650 rounds and no way to replenish it internal of the ship is silly. So I would just double that in the short term.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I gotcha. And I don't disagree with you guys, by the way, I think it should be, heat should primarily be the concern of laser weapons, and ballistics, I feel like you should have the advantage. Because here's the thing I think they always have to avoid, and they always have to keep in mind is, right, there has to be the balances. Well, how do we just keep people from falling into the 313 and I don't know how many patch cycles before that we were, where, it was, everybody was just loading ballistics.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Running the
when
same
I jumped
meta,
into this game, everybody was running ballistics. There was no reason to run laser repeaters or anything like that. So now, but it's funny because now they've just flipped the script. And there's an inherent problem for the most part. Like 90% of people don't use ballistics now, or at least not consistently. There's a few diehards like myself that run mixed loadouts, and every once in a while, like even the PvPers will be like, I mean, don't get me wrong, if you're going after like one target and one target alone, like another player, like it's not necessarily a bad idea if you're any kind of good to use full ballistic loadouts, but know that if you don't get them within that, your ammo count, you're running, you're out of there. So, most people don't like that scenario, and they're like, man, if I have to disengage, things don't go my way, I don't want to quantum away. So even in those states, they're like, well, I'll just run PvP with las repeaters because I won't run out of ammo.
And Jiro
I think if there was
330 ammo on a modern aircraft where the gun is not the primary weapon, probably seems about right. But this world is guns.
Yeah, I got you. I'm with you there too. I think so. Here would be my take that's different from y'all's. In the light fighter category, I actually don't even like the idea of internal reloads. Yep. I'm with you, Atira. There used to be a way to externally reload these weapons. You can actually see on the weapon itself, on like the ballistic Gatlings, the ballistic repeaters, and some of the cannon models, mainly the sword series. They actually have like an ammo pouch, and it's like, why don't they just recomponent that piece? And I would love to actually carry like a few extra in like the ship storage, the personal inventory, because they seem about the size of like mining component gadgets, and stuff like that. So you probably can't carry many, but if you're running a mixed loadout, maybe you can do 1 or 2 reloads before you got to go back to a station, restock them in the ship. I'm down with that, but I think we're missing I don't feel like even with a good power plant and, size 3 repeaters on the laser side, we're doing enough punishment on the heat generation for if I say, I'm not going to run a mixed loadout. I've got, on my Saber, I've got 4 size 3 laser repeaters, and I've got 30 rounds before the capacitor runs dry. I think it should be like, I don't think you should get 1 full trigger pull before the capacitor runs dry. I think it should be 2 trigger pulls, and maybe it's a shorter delay, but, heat generation is going to, or maybe it times you out after like, a fraction of a second or 2 seconds of trigger pull, so that you're consistently more, okay, I got to line those shots out with laser repeaters, but I got a lot of them. I'm never running out of ammo in this fight. But, you know, that would make somebody that it's like, man, if I can lay into them for a few seconds when they do something wrong, yeah, I got it. I'm using ballistics, but man, I'm about to burn them down if I've got, you know, 2 or 3 seconds on, you know, in the slot, they're exposed. That would make a difference, I think, to a PvP player, especially like bounty hunters who are going after singular targets and stuff like that, you know? I don't know. Those are my thoughts. I just don't feel like we're doing enough with the to set the balance between laser repeater and ballistic of any kind. And that goes for cannons too. Like because I think that's across the board. Like you think about the Corsair, like right now the Corsair's just rocking those size 5 or size 4 gimbaled laser cannons. And you can just lay on those until the capacitor runs dry. You know, what impetus is there for you to even consider a ballistic loadout or anything like that? Nothing, for the most part, other than the cool factor. You know, but it would be a big deal if it's like, yeah, I've only got 1 or 2 seconds of continuous fire from those. Now, I'll offer one other thing, and this is actually a question for you guys. In my mind, there's another X factor, a variable that would go in and help determine laser repeaters versus, laser weapons. Let's just go with lasers versus ballistics. And I know disruption's kind of in a little side category of lasers. We can talk about them later. How do you feel about that weapon durability, dependability? Because in my mind, I would say the downside of ballistics, high damage, high penetration, things like that, and the ability, no real heat generation would be, yeah, but that weapon's going to require more maintenance because you're actively putting slugs through it and building up. Yeah, I would agree, right? So I look at that as, and that's kind of why I say I combine it all into one. Like, a well-maintained weapon is a weapon that's less likely to jam. You guys agree?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And don't be wrong. And this is where you can really get into the details, the minutia of different manufacturers. And I love the idea of like this ballistic cannon, the Tarantula series is high damage, slightly higher, maybe just like 10 DPS more than the Sword series. But the Sword series is, like the AK-47 of the gun world, where it's like you could dig this thing and you put this in buried in sand.
That's where my mind was going. Yeah.
Put this in sand and dig it up and fire it, and like it'll work just fine.
But
less likely to jam. Sure, we can go with less accurate too. And you just dial little differences like that. So it depends on what you like. So the player that likes, I don't like doing engineering, I don't like doing maintenance, the Sword series is my gun. Yeah, sure, it does 10 less DPS, but that doesn't really matter as much to me as I know when I pull the trigger, it's going to fire, something like that.
You can leave your ship parked out in the open on Hurston for 2 weeks, and you can, start that thing up, and it's still going to go shoot. The spread might be this big, compared to this big, but yeah, it's going to function. I like that idea too, and that I think that plays into overall weapon balance and feel, in that like if I had my druthers, your ballistics are subdivided into Gatlings, repeaters, and cannons. Cannons being longer range, higher accuracy, and then on down repeaters and Gatlings. But then the compared to the same thing for energy, your energy cannons are not going to have the range, because the projectile, space magic doesn't retain cohesion over a long distance, and that scales on down with repeaters and Gatlings, and that's one thing that I would like to see to make things feel give some more differentiation in terms of what your choice is, your range that you're fighting at, the range that you're engaging at. But I think we've
do we want to talk about range real quick? I want to talk about range.
I want to talk about range, and before we do, because I feel like this is going to go for a few minutes. When it comes to I want to preface it. When it comes to range, I don't think we're going to see any changes going back to bringing longer range out until we get server meshing, because they did do.
I don't think we're gonna get it at all.
I think it's gonna. Well, I
don't
think
think we're
it's
gonna
gonna.
It's
get it
not a
all.
server meshing thing. That's a physics
He wants
engine
us.
thing.
He wants us closer together anyway.
Oh, I
He
know he
always
think-
talks about he wants us
But that's
closer
with
together.
with dogfighting. Remember, we had ships with the scale at which weapons could reach out and shoot was a lot farther. And I get that you know when it comes to dogfighting, I'm not talking about just dogfighting. I think that we're going to see a lot longer range with larger weapons. You know, because
yeah.
Because even though they want us fighting in closer, you know, it's close isn't necessarily a couple hundred meters. You know, it's within visual.
You're
range.
talking about the dog fight versus the capital ship game.
Partly that, but also a little bit more differentiation between your size 4s and your size 1s and 2s. You know, it shouldn't be like a 50-meter difference. You know, that doesn't do anything for you, and it should.
There's no difference right now.
Yeah, there isn't any, and that's the thing is there's no difference in scale between a hammerhead with all size 4s and trying to it should a hammerhead with all size 4s should be able to outreach something that is trying to shoot it with size 2s or size 3s. Because that comes back to bringing the right tool for the job, and I don't think that there's differentiation between guns in terms of right tool for the job as much right now.
Well, let me ask you a question, because this is what I feel like, and this is. Tell me how easy do you think this should be? Because I think it should be, if we wanted to talk about weapon sizes and effectiveness, and this is not one of the categories I wrote down, but I mean, it just seems obvious to me. Size 1, 2, and 3. For me, the idea would be, larger size weapons, cannons, everything like that, especially in the cannon variant. Let me preface this. I don't like that our pips. Well, I don't like there's no real spread. I don't know what happened. Spread is gone.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that they data mine and put on Urkel, but it is such a minuscule difference that it seems immaterial. Mainly, again, because they nerfed all the ranges. And I feel like the range discussion becomes a thing again if we bring spread back into the equation. Like, tighter spread at longer ranges is the domain, I think, of cannons. And not only that, but then you've got that playability where you can adjust between manufacturers and stuff like that and be like, okay, slight variations in damage, tighter spread, and stuff like that. Because I get why they unified all the ranges. What I didn't understand was, why did you just make all the spreads the same? Why did you make all that? I mean, like, there's so many ways to differentiate the weapons even within the game that we have right now, and they're just not there. And it's weird to me because I wonder about, like, I got it. They're remodeling Squadron 42 and they're bringing in master modes and all that kind of stuff. And, when they change the ship distance in combat, yes, they will have to adjust spread again. But I mean, these are just values in an Excel spreadsheet. I feel like, I mean, they're values in code. You highlight it and you change it, and then you see how it plays out.
Especially when the values are grouped, and you don't have to individually change each value. It's things are grouped together.
And you want to see us, instead of using repeaters all the time, at the size 4 and below right now, like, because that's the thing. Like, for the most part, nobody's rocking up cannons. And for a good reason, based on ammo speed, a light fighter can literally juke a cannon round right now at a given range. You're outside 400 meters, and most fighters with their thruster efficiency can see the round incoming and juke it. So, PvPers are like, cannons are worthless. They laugh if they see somebody using cannons in combat right now. And most players don't bother with them unless they're going up against larger ships that can't juke out of the way. Like, you coming up against a Valkyrie, or maybe cannons are viable in your Buccaneer right now. But my argument would be, what I would love even at the light fighter game is, okay, instead of my little tiny square pip, give me like a spread circle of, on my HUD that shows I'm not going to be accurate unless I'm close within, 300 meters. If the spread circle's fully on their ship, then I know at least each round is going to land. If I'm at 800 meters, yeah, my ammo is fast and it flies quickly, but I have to know that a lot of my shots are not going to actually land on target if the spread circle is bigger than their light fighter or whatever. Whereas if I'm using cannons, maybe I do have a little bit more pinpoint accuracy at a slightly longer range. Maybe the difference is, okay, the spread circle is full on the target at 300 meters. At 500 meters on a cannon, I've definitely got it on target, but I have to know that they might juke or something like that. Like, I feel like there's a way to play with that now with spread of weapons, and that'll make people make decisions even on light fighters. Like, do I want cannons or repeaters?
You don't even have to change the user interface, really. You just keep the pip system the way it is, and just let us know that some of these rounds you're going to have like a 1% or a 2% or whatever spread on your volley.
Yeah.
And some of that's going to miss, some of it's going to hit, but it would alter the, and then you change it by weapon.
Yeah. Well, and that also
Yeah.
alleviates a lot of the workload on the server in terms of physics calculations by giving it a chance to hit within the spread versus having to actually calculate the spread for each, a randomized spread for each round based off of an accuracy value. And
I don't know that they're going to move away from that.
Well, it happened
this is the thing.
But that's the thing is that's part of the issue with server meshing, and people don't realize that this is an issue. Is a server, if you've got dozens of people in combat across the server, and people are pulling the trigger and putting out hundreds and thousands of rounds, going in all different directions on with 64-bit precision, they had to specifically make a brand new system designed for Star Citizen to make all these physics calculations for the projectiles to be as lightweight as possible.
For ballistics, that works. Yeah.
It still stresses.
I think for
the server.
ballistics that would absolutely work.
Yeah.
I don't think it would work with a thing you can see.
07 North End, good to see you. But yeah, it's. Oh yeah, well, and yeah, you obviously you're. If you have at a certain visual range, you can't even really track it. And so you can render it out to a certain point, but out to a certain point, you're not going to be able to see the difference, on your repeaters, and so it becomes moot, out past a certain range, or they can fake it visually.
But the other ship can see it, and that's the problem.
Yeah. And that's the hard part.
So if he perceives that all those rounds miss because the spread is what the spread is, but in reality, a variety of those rounds are hitting, then you run into a problem because he's like, "Oh, I'm clear, but now I'm at 50% shields or whatever, or I took hull damage because of their ballistics." I think that idea works to reduce ballistics because you can't see ballistics rounds outside of the tracer.
Yeah,
but
and that's a good point because
it would save space. It would save on computation.
It's a limitation of the game that a lot of people don't take into account because people talk about desync at Xenothreat. Well, desync at Xenothreat isn't just ships moving around, causing desync and the server having to track ship position. The server is also having to track projectiles, and that's a huge...
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'll be right back.
Oh, must be the dog. But that's a huge issue for the server in terms of tracking a big scrum, a big fur ball, is you have a lot of projectiles and projectiles at various speeds going off at different angles, and so it becomes a very complex system. And that's why they're, part of the reason they had to invent this whole new system to track it all, is because it became, these physics calculations were just mind-numbingly complex, and it just wasn't, you weren't able to literally track it all. I think they're going to get there, because they have to. They had to build this calculation system for not only for the PU, but they also had to have it for Squadron, in order for these great big massive capital ship battles to function with all these other ships flying around in between. The physics calculations get nuts, and so it has to work on the client, but it also has to work on the server side, and that's where we're running into the issues. The server, with a lot of people getting into combat, gets into trouble, having to track more and more projectiles running around. And they have to get to the point where they can spread that workload around, and continue to optimize that system. And so that's why, I want to see weapon ranges. Granted, we don't have the big guns yet. We don't have size 7s and size 9s running around, on our own ships. But I do want to see more diversification with ranges, but I don't know if that's
we do on some things
just yet.
The Inferno's rocking a size 7.
Oh yeah, the Inferno has size 7s, but that's the thing. Those are the only size 7s, and the range on those is garbage.
They're the same, I believe. I'll look it up real quick. I believe they're no different than a size 5, 6.
Yeah,
laser cannon.
Yeah, because they, and I think that's I think that's a lot of that is due to rendering. Yeah, the Nautilus has a dual size 7.
Wow, they just made
turret on the nose.
They just made muzzle velocity for the same, for like type, and that fell into the Ares and the Inferno as well.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, go ahead.
Can you catch me up real quick? Because before we get completely out of the range discussion, what's your ideal scenario? Did I miss it?
I don't think
either of you, both.
No, I don't think so. It's just ideas floating around.
Yeah.
His large concern is the system that has to track all the rounds, and that makes a lot of sense. That is the big fight's biggest problem. So
yeah. So I mean, I'm not going to disagree with that at all. I guess. So how do we solve? Here's my thing. Let's just talk. We'll take capital ships out of the game for just a hot second. Let's just pretend they don't exist. One, I don't even like to live in the world of big fleet battles for this game, because I'm also one of the people that's going to sit here and say these Eve style huge fleet battles that you see little advertisements for on YouTube. I don't think Star Citizen should encourage that discussion. I like mini, organic, ideas for later, where it's maybe 1 or 2 sub-capital ships, maybe every once in a while a Javelin is surrounded by some stuff, but that's so far down the road I can't even imagine it outside of Squadron 42. So if we just talk about the sub-capital range, let's just say in the Hammerhead / Perseus / Carrack style range, if you put cannons on those things, where do you think they should be able to hit each other from? Ballpark me a range. 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers, 3.5, 4.
I mean, I think it's outside 4. It's 4 and up for big ship, even moderate big ship, right? Because those are medium-sized ships, sub-capital vessels. I think that's fair. Outside 4 and up is where their primary engagement. If
you're talking size 5s to size 7s, because that's you say Hammerhead and it's okay, well, are you fighting Hammerhead to Hammerhead? Because then all you have is size 4s, but it should be
well, right, yeah.
Well,
that's the Carrack too.
Well, just let me be careful with that though, because I guess what I kind of meant is disregarding the intent of that ship, because the Hammerhead's intent is an anti-fighter screen. So I get why it's using smaller weapons on turrets to screen fighters.
Yep.
So, but let's say the size. Let's say the Perseus, because the Perseus is actually, I think, a little bit shorter in
Shorter,
length.
narrower, with bigger guns.
Yeah. All right.
Yep.
Perseus is rocking those size 7s. Where do you think the optimal engage distance is for it?
5K and out.
That gives it a huge advantage.
Yeah, but
Yep.
they're also bespoke cannons that have a rate of fire that'll probably be pretty slow.
Well, if they stay with the size 7s that they've got on the Inferno, what we're talking about is 700 meters per second for 4 seconds. So really what it is 2.8 kilometers.
Maybe.
Well, it even says that on the ammo range.
Well, but the Inferno is also a ballistic Gatling, and like.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm pretty sure it's the same. Hold on, let me check.
But that's the differentiation we're
Ion.
talking about having. Okay, but the ion,
I look
that's
at it.
part of
I
the-
look at
like
it. I look at it
ion
the
being
way they.
energy.
I look at it the way they put the Jav in for our favorite event type that does not ever damage the server at all. Xenothreat. When the Jav shows up, right? It's not 2 kilometers away. It's a long way away.
Yeah.
I mean,
So, just to be clear, the Ion, by the way, is also 2.8 kilometers on its ammo range.
But the ion is also an energy weapon, and like if I had my druthers, it's an energy cannon, but it's an energy cannon, and so it's going to shoot farther out than a energy ballistic or Gatling, but it's still an energy cannon, and so you're going to want to be need to be closer than a size 7 ballistic cannon, like on the not or like a Nautilus or a Perseus. But that's like the size 7s that are on the port and broadside turrets and the belly turrets for the Javelin. Those are size 7s, and those should be engaging something basically at the extreme edge of visual range for the size.
and
of
they
the ship,
do.
if it's-
That's the way CIG employs it.
I'll be right back again. I'm sorry.
okay.
In a scripted event. It's fine. Yeah, you're right. So when we take it down to like the Perseus, which is more or less supposed to be a faster screening ship for larger ships, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense for that to be a little bit closer. So maybe sub 4K, right? So making those engagements maybe right at the 3K limit, right? When you think about fleet formations, then you have capital ships that are behind that, right? That are using larger weapons to shoot a further distance, right?
Mhm.
So you might have a nice scrum of fighters and medium-sized ships duking it out in and around that 1 to 3K range, and then fighters are even closer, and then you have larger capital ships that are lobbing size 10 torpedoes and those huge size 7, Idris killers, at that 7-8K mark. But that then leads themselves to ship placement and where you want those ships to be in a larger formation.
Yeah.
Which, if an effective range for these larger ships is right, whatever, then, and you can get close, right? And you can just get super up front and personal with them. But I think that would be, risky. Right. So I don't know. It's an interesting discussion, but I feel like pushing cap ships that close together is a bit silly, and even the sub cap ships that of the Perseus variety, because Perseus is an anti-cap ship.
Totally agree.
Patrol vessel.
Totally agree.
Pushing him within 1,500 meters is silly. He doesn't want to be that close necessarily. He wants to be able to see that round coming and see if he can move, right? Whereas larger ships like Idris and Javelins, they tank those things.
Yeah.
Or they should be able to tank those things.
So just to be clear, right, and this is where I agree with you. I think we don't have quite enough variation in the size category in terms of range where we start talking. Because right now, and this is why I wanted to compare it to, the size 5 laser cannon, M7A by Bearing. Guess what its range is?
I could look it up, but tell me.
It's 2.8.
Okay, that's
so
a
what you're
long
saying
way.
there is, so what you're saying there is a Corsair which can mount size 5s, all on its nose. Corsair has the same long-range capabilities that a Perseus with size 7s does. And don't get me wrong.
That's like for me, size 5s is okay. That's okay for size 5, but a size 7 needs to be out at like, 4 or 5, okay. So a couple, a good 2 kilometers out farther. But that's the other difference is those size 5s aren't going to do jack shit to a Perseus. Probably a whole lot of not much.
Well, I mean, size 5s are the entry level for anti-cap ship firepower.
No,
right?
size 7 is entry level for cap ship, for anti-cap.
No,
size
for
5 and
ship.
size 6 is for anti-large. So your size 5s and size 6 are what you're going to be at. Size 5s, you're going to be at the bottom edge of trying to hurt a Perseus, a Hammerhead, a Nautilus. That's the bottom edge. And so, but that's the difference in that, your Perseus doesn't have much in the way of defense against a Corsair, but a Corsair isn't going to, knock it out, in one go with its size 5s, because it's got the lower edge of what's going to be damaging that. And so the Corsair has to watch out for the Perseus's escorts. The Nautilus, probably isn't going to be able to track the Corsair with its size 7 turret on the nose, but it's got the turrets on the size that are size 4s, I think, that are dual, which, if the Corsair gets in too close, he's going to have, be in for a world of hurt between those and the missile turret. And so that's the balance of it. And the range thing is an interesting topic, and I don't envy CIG in having to have that range balance on top of having to balance in armor and balance in shields and shield emitters and components and damaged or weapon types, or ammo types. It's on top of different types of weapons. Like they have. I think CIG is potentially regretting adding so much to the equation. When you think about how much,
I agree with you. Here's what I would offer as the simplest form of solution. Like I said, I think it boils down to, if you want to create variety in the weapon types and their capabilities and give them a specific purpose, I think if you nailed it down to slight variations in heat buildup, we've already got this ammo capacitor pool, so I'm going to just put that to the side for a second. Heat buildup, the spread, coupled with range, because that's really you get a 2-for-1 package deal there, in my opinion. All right, and then for the 2 types, just ballistic versus laser, obviously ammo would be the big part. And this is the part I don't like including, but I'll include it simply because we know they're going to be doing it with components and stuff like that. So I have to imagine it's going to be also with weapons, and that's durability / reliability, whatever you want to. Just put that all into the same category of maintenance, And if you kind of stuck within those fields, you might be able to simplify it to a certain degree. I'll be honest with you, the ammo type thing, I'm struggling with the ammo types. Like the fact that they want to include those in the game, it's like you don't have a system that's already complex enough that it's hard to juggle. You want to give us different types of ammo that do different things? I love it.
Let's go.
I struggle with that. It's like, well, why are you making? You already have. See, that's the thing though. Like it's already very complex, and there's already room for a lot of depth. They're just choosing not to use it right now while they play balance games. And when I saw the ammo things, I was like, how do you even begin to balance the game when you throw in additional variables that you haven't even tested out yet? We haven't even seen. Like, I don't even know. And it's already like, you've got a lot. You got a lot to work out, especially because one last point on that, because the thing that I haven't talked about a lot, but I think is a big discussion point eventually, and we'll share it later more with the components. What do these things consume in terms of fuel and power? Because eventually fuel determines all your ship system's power. Yeah, you got capacitors for the weapons, but the capacitors have to be recharged by your power plant. So right now, the only thing that draws power is your thrusters in terms of hydrogen fuel. That's going to change. So that might be another great equalizer, by the way, on the laser game. It's like, well, ballistics obviously don't require power, but they require bullets.
Efficiency.
So if you run, yeah, exactly right. If you run full laser loadouts, do you run out of fuel faster? I would like that.
It changes your logistics game of, you're
Yeah.
having to
I would
refuel
like
more
that.
often
You're
versus
cool,
rearm
cool
more
man.
often.
Yeah, I
but
would too. And I think that makes sense to me.
That's a good segue though, because before we move on to ordnance, which is missiles and torpedoes, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about mines and bombs. But I wanted to ask you guys, and let's not go into all the different ammo types, but I'll just list those off here in a second. But I want to ask you guys, what your thoughts are about why CIG is, getting to work on these right now, because that's the big question for me is why right now when they have so much balancing to do. The only thing I can think of is that they want to potentially include this into squadron, and that's why they're doing it now, because they're working on balancing for squadron. But so
Yeah.
before I ask, and I'll ask Atiro this first, and then Nightcop, will let you give your thoughts. So the different
perfect.
ammo types are disarray. Actually, real quick, I'm going to pull up the description. So I'll read them off, and I'll read the descriptions. And give me 1 second, chat.
I actually got it up if you want me to read it. I got a laundry list of pages from all the stuff you sent.
All right, so we have disarray ammunition, this is a new charged ballistic projectile that emits electromagnetic pulses, helping to not only damage the target but also disrupt power systems. So essentially, it's distortion, but for ballistics.
I hate that.
I could get it.
That is energy. That is ballistic neutron cannons.
Yeah,
and
those actually go into
that's
production at the end of this month. Flak ammunition, which is in production right now, was mentioned in the monthly report. This new damage type triggers on proximity or expiration, causing a concentrated burst of shrapnel to damage targets in an area. Incendiary ammunition, fire. This is another one that goes into production at the end of the month. This is a new ballistic projectile that burns on impact, causing the target to take damage over time and potentially cause items in the environment to catch fire. So it's like kind of like a roll for chance to cause bleed. And then plasma ammunition also going into production at the end of the month. Further work on this damage type will cause damage over time to actors, vehicles, and ships. Larger weapons of this type will also leave behind a hazard, causing further damage to anything in close proximity to it. This will fulfill the original vision we had for the plasma weapons we already have in game, and those we have planned for the future. And then the last thing that they have mentioned, which is just started production at the end of April, was distortion propagation. So further work on this damage type to allow correct propagation into systems. This makes the location of impact much more important, as powered items closer to the impact will begin to suffer more severely. This will fulfill the original vision we had for the distortion weapons we already have in game, and those we have planned for the future. So, now that that's done, so Atira, what are your thoughts about CIG putting these ammo types into production right now? And do you think we're going to see them soon, or is this they're getting it done for Squadron? We'll see it in a year or two.
Oh boy. I mean, if it's going in for Squadron and it's a part of their agile production schedule for software development, and this is where they want to do it, and that's just why we're seeing it on the roadmap. Okay, I get it. I think that it makes sense from a world reality perspective. But as Nycop said, it is one more bit of complexity, right? Damage over time and status effects and things like that. I think the disarray ammunition is absolutely stupid. I love the rest of them though, right? Like if you want to cause damage and do distortion at the same time, just use neutrons and that's it, right? It everything doesn't have to have a EMP option. That said, all the other ones, like I think flak ammunition is going to be key. I think it's going to be very important for larger ships to be able to lay down Battlestar Galactica style flak screens. I think incendiary is going to be a little bit more important than plasma for like artillery or for orbital bombardment, right? If you want to just set somebody's base on fire and laugh from orbit, right? It's going to be pretty important. I don't think it's going to matter much for ship combat. I don't think you're going to see people flying around using incendiary rounds. Although I will say the primary caliber 50 ammunition issued for tanks is armor piercing incendiary rounds. So every single round has like, I think it's white phosphorus, but I'm not 100% sure, but it's an incendiary round. And so when it strikes the target, it starts, or when you fire it, it starts burning. It strikes the target, it penetrates, and it's just burning on the inside. So that is like the go-to ammunition for wartime usage. So, that'll tear up the inside of your ship. So it might be worth using armor, incendiary rounds for ballistics, because it could just start screwing up your internals, damaging damage over time to components and internals versus the exterior of your ship.
Atira, can you move your mic a little bit closer to your face?
I can. Does that help?
There you go. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
That way you and Nycop are about equal.
Part of the ship.
Yeah,
part of the ship.
Part of the crew.
I don't think we need to see
Part of
them
the crew.
right now
Part of the ship.
in the
Yeah.
PU, right? I think that's silly. And let's get
I hope
standard
we don't.
ballistics and energy. That said, I think long term, I think they're good to have planned, good to include them. I think there's battlefield uses for all of those. I think you can, not strategies, but you can certainly play around with some tactical employment uses to generate effects to get your enemy to do something. Right? We know that's going to work on NPCs because they've just last week, I think we're talking about, they got a little bit better in having NPCs highlight high risk areas where they're going to take damage over time from things like fire or electricity or whatever, and then they have to make a choice. Do I make the risk to go through that, or do they canalize to one direction, right? So you have the opportunity then to lay down fire screens or plasma fire screens that force NPCs to come a specific way that you want them to, or players for that matter, depending on what you're doing. That's what I'll say. I'll leave it there.
Nycop, what are your thoughts on the damage, or not damage, the ammo types, and then distortion propagation? Because distortion propagation is what they're rebuilding, reworking the system for distortion to function how they want it to.
Okay, so I'll kill that one first. I like the idea of distortion propagation in terms of where a distortion repeater or laser cannon or whatever lands on a target affects local components. I think nobody has any issues there, right? Like in terms of like, hey, if I hit near that component on the ship, those components are primarily affected before components on the other end of the ship are. Down with that. Distortion propagation needs to be a thing. I hate the idea of a cheat for ballistic weapons to have distortion ammo. Like, I hate it. I think it's dumb. I think it's dumb. It's like it's one of those things. It's like,
it just like a little paintball with a whole bunch of disruption, whatever goo in it. It's just it's dumb to me.
It's frustrating.
It muddies the waters again, because it's one of those things like you already have like a lot of complex differences, or the potential for depth in an already, what I would argue is plenty complex weapon system. You do not need to just muddy it further with, oh, well, I want to run distortion type weapons, but I really like the look of ballistic cannons. Now I can just pack them with distortion ammo. It's like, nah, there has to be choice to this game. There has to be consequence. There has to be a reason behind each decision. And, I love the idea that distortions, you want to run a distortion loadout? That's going to cost you heat. You're going to need some good coolers for that. You want to run ballistics because you don't care what happens to your target. You're in that kind of mindset. Okay, cool. That's the payoff, and you don't have to worry about your coolers as much, because weapons won't generate a lot of heat. There's still it's like a cheat then, and it bothers me a little bit. Now, the incendiary ammo, and that one's just like a tough one for me because I feel like that is coming along simply to further fire gameplay, and I want fire gameplay. But I would prefer that fire gameplay is not centered around incendiary ammo. I think that should be the thing that comes with energy weapons. I think you could already strike a balance. Like, this would give us another reason to choose ballistics on ships where it's like, I would prefer, maybe if you want to run a ballistics loadout as opposed to distortion, like your goal is one day, and granted, I understand I'm future stuff there, one day, the precise nature of a ballistic cannons, maybe I'm shooting out coolers or power plants or just their shield generators or emitters and stuff like that. And I leave them defenseless enough so that I get inside the ship. Well, if I'm using ballistics, hopefully what that would not result in is the ship itself catching on fire. If I know that energy weapons risk that more, then that's another reason for me to choose ballistics in that game, where I want to do the same thing instead of using an energy weapon. I don't know. I feel like there's already a mechanic there. Like, the idea is laser repeaters and lasers. Side note, I really wish they would kill neutron repeaters and plasma cannons and what was the other gun that I think is just meaningless? The rail guns. CIG, you want some advice right now? Kill all of those weapon types. They mean nothing. They don't. Like, nobody even uses them for the most part, except for a very select brand of people right now are using the NDBs, the neutron repeaters, because if you have a higher end machine,
my entire freaking Scorpius and neutron repeaters now.
Well, the consequence of it is in the PvP metagame. This is what I've heard. So don't. This is not first-hand experience, but I've heard NDBs actually cause a frame loss based on their graphical effect, their visual effects.
I'm sure.
And so higher end machines, and it's for all people involved in the fight. So for higher end machines, the frame loss doesn't affect you so much, whereas the person you're shooting, if they have a lower end computer, might suffer a frame loss and therefore not do well against you in a fight.
You're talking about mass drivers, though, right?
Totally
said mass drivers. Those are rail guns, I think. Those are the mass.
Yeah, the mass drivers. Sorry, the mass drivers is what I mean when I talk about the rail guns. I think they describe them as rail guns in their lore, but
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
You just said they ought to have a stupidly fast, but slow rate of fire, but really fast velocity.
If they wanted to do that, I don't understand why they haven't done that now. That would give some variety to it, and it'd be like, okay, that might be an interesting weapon choice.
Going to CIG, man.
Yeah, but that's the thing is like, if you want my honest opinion, those weapons were inserted to make a ship sound more attractive and more interesting in an early phase of this game. I'm sorry, this is just reality in my opinion, right? It was an early phase of the game, right? Yeah. They probably did have plans like, oh yeah, mass drivers and neutron repeaters are going to be totally a thing, and they're going to be really interesting different weapon types, and then eventually the game evolves, and now you're into this state where it's like, okay, really, for the most part, outside of aesthetics, there's no difference between a neutron repeater and a laser repeater. Yeah, I got it. The neutron repeaters are blue pew-pews, and everybody likes blue pew-pews. The mass drivers are cannons. Like, and it just boils down to, it's like, okay, well, listen, if you don't want to create a whole new variety of weapon types, you've literally got these outliers on the fringe that you have no intent of balancing. I don't think they do, honestly. Honestly, I want to cut down their workload. Just kill them. Just kill them. They were fluffy lore weapons at one point in time that they may have had good intentions for. The time has passed. Just nix them. Let's go with repeaters, Gatlings, cannons of both laser and distortion. I'll keep distortions, right? But even distortions fall into that same category, right? For the most part, they just have repeaters and cannons. But got it, 2 out of 3 or whatever. But let's just keep it that way. And we can just live in that select world, and they can apply the things that they intend to do with ammo to the weapon types as they stand right now, and that cuts down their workload again. There's less to balance.
Yep.
Like if you throw in the fact that they've got to balance different manufacturers with different, outside of the aesthetics, like they really don't have time for ammo, in my opinion. I don't know.
I would like to just say, CIG, don't let it cost you production time.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you find it's taking forever to balance these, then just don't put them in the game.
Yeah.
Or wait until the game is out and then spend time doing it.
Yeah. That I agree with too. And my worry tree is, yes. So here's my worry. These are coming in for squadron. That's why I think they honestly want to bring these in.
And that's fine.
Because I don't think they make sense in the great sandbox.
I think
these make sense,
but they only do once everything else is in. Right?
It's I don't
think
why
design them now.
Yeah, I don't think it's a priority right now. Because that's
exactly that's why I think they're doing it for squadron.
And they want to do it for squadron. Right? Because
I just worried that
if that's how your freaking workflow is, do it.
Delays things. That is my concern. Is that it is going to make the project of balancing for squadron take longer, and I think that they have earmarked a certain amount of time. Like, hey, we can get this project done in this amount of time, and it's okay. Do you run the risk of pushing that project out longer and delaying squadron, or is this going to be one of those things where it's good enough and we can push squadron and it's not in a good place? And I would much rather them not bite off more than they can chew and have squadron have a good balance. Because I mean, the balance isn't a PvP balance; it's a
it's a PvE balance.
It's a PvE balance, but you have to make that. You have to have a good feel for it, so that way you're not just going to equip your F8 Lightning with all of this and just be God mode. Because that you have that same issue.
For a single player, that's okay, right? Because you're the hero in the adventure, and you want it to be challenging, but you also want it to be
cool.
I mean, you want your player to win and
want
have
to feel
fun,
cool,
and you want to feel cool, right? So
but you can do
all these values, so
do
all these
someone
things.
may pick one thing, and for one play style, pick another thing for another play style, and have all things be equal. Not everybody's going to pick this one, just like they would.
But
in
that doesn't.
PvP.
But that shouldn't necessarily translate to Star Citizen, and I think that's the point we're all dancing around. It's like, do whatever you want to get squadron out and out, right? We all know it's hero mode.
Yeah.
We all know that it's PvE, but don't give us these things now in the PU where it's just gonna create issues and problems and trials and tribulations.
Yeah,
you can import that
point
stuff
to that
later.
Though, Atira is like, right, they've already done most of the mission designs.
Yeah.
They've already got master modes, supposedly. For most of the squadron-related ships. Or at least they should by now. Because they should be well into the, okay, this mission should feel a certain way. There should be this kind of struggle in it. There should be, these points in time where it's harder or easier and stuff. And I'm with Tree in this, is like, you guys are just working on the ammo thing now? Like, that's gonna just, if you put that in Squadron 42, because it feels like it's got to be for Squadron 42, you have to go back and rebalance it every one of those missions.
Yeah.
Based on player choice. Now, they might be able to kill a little bit of that and be like, oh, well, the ammos don't become available till like mission 18 and
to be fair,
18 through 20. You have the logistic supports of those. It's like, but still, it's like, God damn it.
To be fair,
work with what you got, guys. Get the missions done.
Yeah, to be fair, on the progress tracker, the ammo types aren't listed under Squadron 42, just the PU. So that begs the question, is it, like Atira mentioned, is this a staggered development thing? The weapon content team has time to work on it right now. Because if you look at their schedule, it's like, there does seem to be a gap in that, this is what they have time to work on. Distortion propagation being for both. But and I'm going to close this off on the gun part before we move on to missiles, because we're already at over an hour and a half total.
You knew this was going to happen.
It always does, but at the same time, it's good conversation.
We're talking
so I
about
can't
weapons,
complain.
for fuck's sake.
Yeah, and I talked for like the first 10, 15 minutes anyway. So, I totally agree with you guys in that I hate the idea of what was the distortion ballistics. I think that's dumb. I think it's dumb. If you want distortion, you pick specific distortion weapons, and it's a niche.
Yeah.
And you need to use that niche in conjunction as a part of a good coordinated tactic. An assault where you're running all distortions and you're following in behind somebody who's running all energy weapons to blast a hole in those shields, and at a specific point where we want the shields knocked out behind where the main engines are, and then you're going to come into that hole, fill it with your distortion, and now the main thrusters are offline for however long. I think that's a great mechanic, because you have to think about it with distortion and really with any damage type. A lot of this is built around not so much your dogfight, because you're being able to target a specific spot on a Gladius. Yeah, good luck. But it's for your larger ships, because this is a huge part of what Wing Commander was, and then CR is a huge fan of the Descent Free Space series, where you're going up against these capital ships and you have to take out the shield generator for this portion of the ship, and it's a square on the side of the ship, and you have to go and shoot that. And that's this is a high fidelity immersive aspect of it, where you'll be able to scan a javelin or an Idris and know that there's power plants along this portion of the flank of the ship. And if you can knock down the shields to get your distortions in there, you can knock out power to half the ship or whatever, and make things make life hell for the night cob on that Idris, who then has to reroute power and stuff. That's good gameplay, because it's a solid tactic, but it requires significant choice and commitment, and execution. I don't like the idea of incendiary ammo. I don't remember who said it on the in the chat. I get where Tyr is coming from a tank perspective, but when it comes to ships with all of the electronics on the inside and everything else that's on board,
that's why it's so good.
All the power stuff, you don't need an incendiary round to start a fire on a ship. You are going to have by having something, if it penetrates,
doesn't hurt though.
You're going to start an electrical fire, Star Jump.
So that brings up a good point. So just to be clear though, which point you bring up is this might be the use for incendiary ammo. Is we talked about this when we talked about damage control, right? If I don't want to fire, I will just make sure that there's no oxygen in space. Like, you might have all those electrical components. Even electrical components require oxygen in order to really have a fire propagation. Otherwise, it's just damage to the component itself.
Yeah,
you get some sparks, and that's the end of the game. Whereas incendiary ammunition, I guess the argument
that I don't think requires air.
It does not, especially depending on the type of materials you do. What you're really talking about there is like magnesium-based like fires. We call them class deltas in the submarine world. And yes, they are usually as a result of incendiaries, pyrotechnics catching on fire. You can't just starve those by starving the oxygen component of that fire. You have to destroy the chemical reaction. Now, fire extinguishing and damage control gameplay. They should still only burn locally, but
yeah, like if you take the fire out of an environment, for a room, and you had a incendiary round go through there, it's going to burn around that. It's going to burn what it's in contact with, but without air to propagate, to those other flammable things and make those burn. Those aren't.
That's still
you're
DPS
not going to get.
Though.
Yeah.
That's still that could be a DPS that reduces over time as it burns. Yeah, but it's still DPS. It's still
just a lot of complexity though.
Burning its way through your ship, melting its way through components, electrical relays, until it falls out the other side of your ship.
I see. That's a level of complexity that I don't think CIG wants to take on. I would much rather.
No, I don't think they do either.
And I don't think that it necessarily.
and it generates a chance
A
to
DOT countdown. That's all it
start a
has to
fire
be.
based off of what's there. Because that's the thing is the
Sure,
components
absolutely.
are localized. And so if you hit this
And
area of the ship and it has a power plant or a cooler, okay, sweet, that thing's having a malfunction. It's going to start sparking and catch fire and catch fire the things around it. I don't think you need an incendiary round to make sure you catch the drapes on fire in the
If there's
Origin
atmosphere.
600 series. Yeah.
But it's going to continue to cause damage versus a stock ballistic round, a ball round as we call it.
Yeah.
Somebody's at my door. Is just going to cause
somebody's got a
damage
visitor.
one time. It's going to cause damage one time, and then it's going to sit there. Whereas if you have incendiary round, it's going to apply a DOT to that area over time. And I think you may not even see the fire because it's inside your ship, but that's what I think they're going for. So.
Yeah. It seems like a sci-fi way of chance to cause bleed, and I think that's
I'm with you.
It's like it just seems reaching for me.
I think you should just do that with energy weapons.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love flak.
That's where
I
I'm
think
at.
Flak will be super cool because
I gotta step away.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about.
We didn't talk about flak.
Yeah,
I love it.
But
I'm down with you. I think it should just be anti-ordnance. Like that's the game of flak, in my opinion. That's your anti-missile torpedo defense for capital ships.
I love the idea of you being the gunnery officer and saying, okay, you stagger your, because like you have the turrets on the side of the javelin, and you say, okay, you stagger it so you have a flak wall of from 1 to 2,000 kilometers out, or 2 to 3,000 kilometers out. And, okay, you got this turret and this turret are at 2,000, and this turret are at 3,000, and that way they just put out a wall in between you and where the threats are coming from, and nothing makes it through. And that's just that's
I think that's the Eclipse
good
defense.
gameplay. Yep.
Yeah. I think that's how capital ships survive against, and sub-capital ships survive against the Eclipse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Eclipse, the Retaliator. I think that that's part of it. And actually, let's getting into the ordnance portion. But yeah, that's I heard his rich person doorbell going off. For some reason the butler didn't answer it, so he has to go scold him and then answer the door for himself.
Man, somebody's getting an ass showing later.
Yeah. What do I pay you for? You have your own closet.
Yeah, what do I pay you
that you can live in rent free? And
I had to answer my own door.